The first time my son came home with bruises around his wrists, I told myself it was just rough play at recess. Kids fall, kids push, kids get hurt. But when he flinched away from me, away from his own mother, I knew something was horribly wrong. I'm not exaggerating when I say Matthew was my entire world. After the divorce, he was the reason I kept getting out of bed. He was only 8, but he had this way of hugging me so tight, his cheek pressed against my chest, that made me feel like maybe I wasn't such a failure. So when he came barreling through the front door that Tuesday afternoon, crying harder than I'd ever seen, his small body trembling like he was trying to hold in an earthquake, I felt something inside me split open. The bathroom, he choked out between sobs. He tried, his words broke apart into gasps. I sat on the kitchen floor, clutching him against me, waiting until he could breathe enough to explain. And when he finally did, when he whispered that it wasn't his teacher everyone should be afraid of, but the school janitor, I swear my blood froze. For weeks, every parent at Oak Ridge Elementary in Cedar Falls had been talking about one man, Mr. Larson. He was Matthew's third-grade teacher. The year before, there had been an investigation into inappropriate behavior with students, but the findings were labeled inconclusive. That didn't matter to anyone. The entire parent board had already decided he was guilty. And no one was louder about it than Frank, the janitor. Every afternoon, Frank positioned himself at the pickup line like some kind of self-appointed watchdog. Coffee cup in hand, voice booming, he'd go on about how disgusting it was that Larson was allowed back in the classroom. Parents nodded along like sheep, murmuring agreement. But Matthew noticed something I hadn't. He told me Mr. Larson didn't act like a man with anything to hide. He kept his distance from students. He never volunteered for recess duty, never lingered where he didn't belong. Instead, he watched Frank. Always Frank. Following him out of classrooms, pulling him aside, hovering in this tense, quiet way that didn't make sense. Matthew told me this one night in the softest whisper, as if it was a secret. I brushed his hair back, told him he was smart to notice, and promised him he was safe. I didn't realize at the time just how important that detail would be. The day it all came crashing down, Matthew had gone to use the bathroom during recess. That's where Frank cornered him. Matthew said Frank followed him in, locked the main door, and walked up behind him while he was at the urinal. "Let me help you with that zipper," Frank whispered. Matthew's voice shook as he told me this, eyes wide with a kind of fear no child should ever know. He said he felt Frank's hand reaching, when suddenly, the door burst open. It was Mr. Larson. Matthew said he'd never heard his quiet teacher shout before. "Frank, get out. Now." Frank laughed it off, claiming he was just cleaning, but Larson stood between them and didn't move until Frank finally left. Then Larson walked my son back to class and told him he was brave, that he'd done nothing wrong. But what Matthew told me next made my stomach lurch. After school, Mr. Larson pulled him aside. He crouched down, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "What happened today, only tell your parents. Not the principal. Not other teachers. Just your parents. Promise me." Why would a teacher say that? Why would he make it a secret? That night, Principal Green called me. Her voice was calm, controlled, almost rehearsed. She said there'd been an incident where Mr. Larson had overreacted to Frank while he was just doing routine cleaning. She suggested Larson was becoming paranoid, maybe unstable, and that perhaps Matthew would be better off transferring to another class. I hung up and sat in silence, phone heavy in my hand. Something was wrong. Very wrong. That night, I emailed Mr. Larson asking to meet. At 6 the next morning, I sat in his empty classroom, the air heavy with the smell of old coffee. His face looked hollow, the kind of exhausted you only see in people who've been fighting alone for too long. "My son said you told him not to tell anyone," I said, voice sharper than I intended. "I'm glad he told me anyway. Because if what he says is true, then I need answers." Larson didn't argue. Instead, he opened his desk drawer with a small key and pulled out a thick folder. When he spread the photos across the desk, my heart slammed in my chest. Frank, entering classrooms after hours. Frank, standing over empty desks. Frank's van parked at the school at 2 in the morning. And one photo that made me sick, Frank inside Matthew's classroom, hand resting on a tiny chair, the clock behind him glowing 2:46 a.m. He has keys to every room, Larson said quietly. Principal Green gave them to him after I filed a report. Said it was for extra security. I wanted to throw up. Then Larson leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. There's more. Green monitors all parent emails. She reads everything. That's why I asked you to come here in person. They've done this before. They bury complaints. They make families disappear. I shoved the photos into my purse, hands trembling. His words rattled inside me, families disappearing. Complaints erased. When I walked out into the parking lot, cars were starting to fill in. And there was Frank, sitting in his van, sipping coffee, watching. He waved at me with that same friendly smile, like nothing in the world was wrong. My skin crawled. That night, I tried telling my ex-husband everything. The bathroom. The photos. The bruises. But he only sighed into the phone, his tone dismissive. You're overreacting again, Anna. Frank's a good guy. He fixed our garage door last month, remember? The words hit me like a slap. He had been inside our house. And that wasn't the worst of it. Not even close. I couldn't stop replaying my ex-husband's words in my head. Frank's a good guy. He fixed our garage door last month. Garage door. That was the moment I realized he'd been inside my house. Not just near my child at school, but inside the place where Matthew should have felt safest. When I hung up, I found my son sitting at the kitchen table, spooning cereal into his mouth without tasting it. His eyes were glassy, like he wasn't really there. When I reached for the cereal box to pour myself some, he flinched so hard the spoon clattered against the bowl. Sweetheart, let me see your arms, I said softly. He hesitated, then rolled up his sleeves. Purple bruises circled both wrists. Fingerprints. My stomach dropped. Who did this to you? He whispered so quietly I almost missed it. Is Mr. Larson in trouble or for helping me? I don't want him to be in trouble because of me. I forced my voice to stay calm. No, honey. You didn't do anything wrong. Neither did he. But inside, I was unraveling. The next morning, I marched into the Cedar Falls police station, clutching Matthew's photo and holding onto the truth like it was a lifeline. I need to report an attempted assault on my son, I told the desk sergeant. At Oak Ridge Elementary. In the bathroom. He looked up slowly from his paperwork, his expression flat. Do you have evidence of physical contact? My son has bruises. His teacher witnessed Frank, the janitor, cornering him. I have photos. The officer actually smiled. Frank O'Connor has been working at that school 15 years. Here's the reason it's safe. My daughter's in Principal Green's honor program. Are you sure this isn't a misunderstanding? I gripped the edge of the counter. My child has bruises. And the teacher you're citing. His tone sharpened. That's the same teacher who was investigated last year. For the same kind of thing you're accusing Frank of. It felt like the ground cracked under me. The sergeant leaned back in his chair. Look. Without hard evidence, medical documentation, multiple witnesses, this is hearsay. And frankly, you should be careful about defamation. Frank's respected in this community. I left shaking, my hands clammy on the steering wheel. On the drive home, I called Mr. Larson. It rang once before going to voicemail. I texted instead, went to police. Please be careful. A reply came instantly. They know. Green called an emergency meeting. I'm being terminated. My chest squeezed. They'd gotten to him too. As if on cue, a white district van crept past me on Main Street, windows tinted black. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my phone rang again. Principal Green's name lit up my screen. "I heard about your accusations," she said, her voice slick with false sympathy. "I think we should meet to discuss Matthew's well-being." "I don't think that's necessary." "I've already spoken with your ex-husband," she cut in smoothly. "He's very concerned about the disturbing fantasies you seem to be projecting onto school staff." My throat went dry. "You called my ex?" "Of course. Both parents deserve to be informed. Unstable behavior from a custodial parent is something we take very seriously." Her voice was sugar-laced with poison. "I hope you'll get the help you need, for Matthew's sake." She hung up before I could respond. My hand shook as I searched my phone. Something tugged at my memory. Yesterday, when Matthew had first told me about the bathroom, I'd been holding my phone in my lap. I opened the voice recorder app, one sometimes used for work meetings. And there it was. 47 minutes of audio. I scrubbed through Matthew's crying, my own soothing words, until I reached the background noise. The faint hum of car engines from the pickup line outside. And then, clear as day, Frank's voice, distant but unmistakable. "Such pretty boys this year. Such pretty, pretty boys." My stomach turned. Finally, evidence. My phone buzzed again. An unknown number. "Stop now or everyone will know what kind of mother lets this happen." I stared at the message, then at the audio file. I had proof. But I also had a target on my back. And I knew, with sick certainty, that this was only the beginning. I couldn't shake the way my ex-husband's voice sounded when he brushed me off. "You're overreacting, Anna. Frank's a good guy. He fixed our garage door last month." Those words made my skin crawl. The garage. He'd been inside my house. That night, when I tried to sit down with Matthew over dinner, his spoon just clinked against the bowl, his face blank. When I reached for the cereal box, he recoiled so fast the milk spilled across the table. "Sweetheart," I whispered, "let me see your arms." He hesitated, then slowly rolled up his sleeves. Purple bruises ringed his wrists, like fingerprints pressed into his skin. My stomach turned over. "Did Frank do this?" I asked carefully. Matthew's eyes welled. "Is Mr. Larson gonna get in trouble for helping me? I don't want him to be in trouble because of me." I kissed the top of his head, forcing my voice not to break. "No, honey. You didn't do anything wrong. Neither did he." But inside, I was shaking so hard I could barely breathe. The next morning, I drove straight to the Cedar Falls police station. The desk sergeant barely looked up from his paperwork when I walked in. "I need to report an attempted assault on my son," I said. My voice cracked, but I kept going. "At Oak Ridge Elementary. In the bathroom." The janitor, Frank O'Connor, he followed my son inside and... "Do you have evidence of physical contact?" he interrupted, sounding bored. "My son has bruises," I said, holding up the photos on my phone. His teacher saw. That's when the sergeant actually smiled. "Frank's been keeping that school safe for 15 years. My daughter's in Principal Green's honors program." "Are you sure you're not misunderstanding?" "My child is terrified," I snapped. "His wrists are covered in bruises." The sergeant leaned back in his chair. "And the teacher you're citing?" "That's the same man who was investigated last year. The one everyone already suspects. Doesn't that tell you something?" It felt like a punch to the chest. He kept talking, his tone condescending. "Without medical documentation, without multiple witnesses, this is just hearsay. And you might want to be careful about defamation. Frank's respected around here." I walked out of that station in a fog, the weight of it pressing down on me. Even the police were siding with him. On the drive home, I called Mr. Larson. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. I texted, "Went to police." Please be careful. A reply buzzed back instantly, they know. Green called an emergency meeting. I'm being terminated. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles went white. As if on cue, a white district van rolled slowly past me on Main Street. Its windows were tinted black. I checked my mirrors every second until I got home. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my phone rang again. The caller ID made my throat close. Principal Green. I heard about your accusations, she said smoothly, like she'd been rehearsing it. I think it's best we meet to discuss Matthew's well-being. I don't think that's necessary. I've already spoken with your ex-husband, she cut me off. He's very concerned about the disturbing fantasies you're projecting onto staff. My stomach dropped. You or what? You called him. Of course. Both parents need to be informed. Unstable behavior from a custodial parent is something we take very seriously. Her voice dripped with false sympathy. I hope you'll get the help you need, for Matthew's sake. Then she hung up. Just like that. I stood in my kitchen, phone buzzing in my hand, when a thought hit me. Yesterday, when Matthew first told me about the bathroom, I'd been holding my phone. My thumb must have hit record. I opened my recorder app. And there it was. 47 minutes of audio. I scrubbed through the file until I reached the background noise from the pickup line outside. Faint at first, then clearer, Frank's voice. Such pretty boys this year. Such pretty boys. My entire body went cold. Finally, proof. A new message popped up immediately. Unknown number. Stop now. Or everyone will know what kind of mother lets this happen. I stared at the words, then at the audio file glowing on my screen. My hand shook as I backed it up to 3 separate cloud accounts. For the first time, I had something real. But Principal Green was right about one thing. This was going to get much worse before it got better. When I tucked Matthew into bed that night, he clutched his stuffed bear so tightly the seams strained. He whispered, "If I tell, will they take me away from you?" I kissed his forehead, whispering back, "No one is taking you from me." But the truth? I wasn't so sure. Because I'd lived through this once before, different names, different circumstances, but the same feeling of being silenced. When I was 12, my own father convinced my mom that I was a liar. I told her that his brother had touched me during a family cookout. My mom sat me down, holding my small hands in hers, and asked me to stop making up stories that ruin lives. I can still remember the way my chest caved in, how powerless I felt as the adults chose to protect each other instead of me. And now here I was, 32 years old, watching the same machine gear up to swallow my son whole. The next morning, I drove Matthew to the pediatrician. Dr. Alvarez was kind, careful. She examined his wrists, documenting every mark with photos. "These bruises are consistent with forceful gripping," she said softly, her eyes flicking to me with something between concern and warning. "I'll have to file a report. But legally, without a direct witness, it may be considered inconclusive." My stomach dropped. Again, the same word. Inconclusive. The nurse who came in to help gave me a strange look before saying, "My sister works in records here. Did you know Frank's wife just started in that department?" The air seemed to vanish from the room. Even here, at the doctor's office, they had their hooks in. When I got home, I parked across the street to gather myself before walking inside. That's when I noticed a silver sedan I knew too well. My ex-husband's. He should have been downtown at his office. I followed with my eyes as he walked into the building across the street. Principal Green was with him. And trailing behind them was a woman with a briefcase stamped with the CPS logo. My phone buzzed. A text from David. "We need to talk about your behavior. You're scaring Matthew. I'm taking steps to protect him." Protect. That word hit me like a fist. I knew exactly what it meant. Emergency custody modifications. Claims of child endangerment. They could take him in 48 hours. The system meant to protect my son was being twisted to erase me. I couldn't think straight. I drove to my best friend Rachel's house, desperate for somewhere safe. She answered the door, her little girl clinging to her leg, and gave me a quick hug. "Of course Matthew can stay here a while," she said, though her eyes flicked nervously over my shoulder, scanning the street. As Matthew ran off to play with her daughter, Rachel pulled me aside. "I should tell you. Frank's daughter is in Emma's dance class. He volunteers backstage. Helps with costume changes." My stomach lurched. "Rachel, you need to." She cut me off. "Anna, Principal Green called the parents this morning. She said you're unstable." She used the word breakdown. I staggered back like she'd slapped me. Even Rachel, my safe place, was now looking at me differently. I left Matthew with her anyway. What else could I do? I drove downtown to my lawyer's office, gripping my phone like it was the last rope keeping me from falling. But even there, the ground crumbled beneath me. My son had Mr. Larson last year, the receptionist said with a too-sweet smile as she checked me in. Something always felt off about that man. Inside, my lawyer's expression told me everything before she spoke. Emergency custody hearings can be expedited within 48 hours if your ex claims Matthew's at risk, she said. And Anna, right now, the evidence is stacked against you. I leaned forward. I have evidence. I have a recording of Frank saying disgusting things. I have photos. She shook her head. You're citing a teacher who's already been labeled suspicious. You're a mother with a custody history, making accusations against a respected community figure. It won't hold. I felt my chest hollow out. Every road I took curved back to the same dead end. When I left her office, I stopped in a grocery store parking lot to catch my breath. That's when a shadow fell across me. I looked up. Frank. He wasn't in uniform now, just jeans and a polo shirt. His smile was wide, too wide. "Heard you've been having a rough time, Anna," he said lightly, stepping closer than he needed to. "Poor Matthew. Such a tough day yesterday. Don't worry, I'll be checking on him personally." My hand slid toward my purse, where I'd hidden the photos Larson gave me. Frank's eyes flicked to the movement. His smile didn't waver. "That's what we do here in Cedar Falls," he murmured. "We look out for each other's kids." Behind him, I spotted his van. The back doors were open. Inside were cardboard boxes labeled with classroom numbers. Every classroom. Every child. My throat locked. I managed to croak, "I need to go." Frank just waved like we were old friends. "Give Matthew my best. Tell him Mr. Frank's always watching out for him." That night, when I pulled into my driveway, a small grey Honda was waiting at the curb. Mr. Larson climbed out. He looked worse than ever, his hands trembling as he pressed a flash drive into my palm. "They fired me an hour ago," he whispered. "But I saved everything. There's more you need to know." He glanced around nervously. "Check your attic. I know it sounds insane. But Frank's been inside your house. Remember the garage repair? He had access. Check." Before I could ask, he was back in his car, driving away. I stood there in the dark, my neighbors watching from their windows, some even lifting phones to record. The unstable mother, standing in her driveway with the disgraced teacher. Another scene for them to whisper about. Inside, I pulled down the attic ladder. My legs shook as I climbed into the dust and shadows. Among the Christmas boxes and old toys, I found a stack of items that didn't belong. Matthew's missing swim trunks. A school t-shirt I'd thought we'd lost. And most horrifying, a notebook I had never seen before. Children's names filled the pages. Next to each name were little stars. Matthew had 3. My heart hammered in my ears. And then, Downstairs, I heard the garage door rumble open. David was home. Hours earlier than usual. The garage door rattled louder than my heartbeat. I scrambled down the attic ladder, the notebook tucked into the waistband of my jeans. By the time I reached the kitchen, David was walking in, loosening his tie. He stopped when he saw me. His eyes flicked to the dust on my clothes. His jaw tightened. "We need to talk," he said coldly. "About this insanity you're dragging Matthew through." "David, please, listen to me. I found something upstairs. Frank has been in this house." "Stop." He raised his hand, and the sharpness in his voice made me flinch. "Principal Green showed me everything. Your erratic behavior. Your paranoid emails. Do you have any idea what you're doing to our son?" "Erratic?" My throat went dry. Frank tried to hurt him. "You saw the bruises. You know." David's expression hardened. "Frank has been documenting your instability for weeks. Every wild accusation, every evidence that you've made up. He's been nothing but supportive, and you're trying to destroy him." The betrayal hit me so hard I thought I'd collapse. My ex-husband, the man who'd once sworn to protect Matthew, was now Frank's ally. "You have until tonight," David said, his voice flat, rehearsed. "Drop this. Apologize to the school. Get psychiatric help. Or I'll support the emergency custody transfer. Matthew deserves better than a mother who's losing her grip on reality." I stood there shaking, the notebook pressed against my skin like both salvation and a death sentence. That evening, I drove to Rachel's house to pick up Matthew. The front door was ajar. Voices carried from the living room. I stepped inside and froze. Frank was there. His toolbox sat on the floor near the stairs. Rachel hovered nearby, flustered, saying something about a leak in the upstairs bathroom. Frank turned and smiled, too wide, too cheerful. "Just fixing things, Anna. Can't have water damage in a house with kids." His toolbox blocked the staircase. At the top of the landing, Matthew stood frozen, pale, his little hands gripping the railing. He wouldn't come down. "Some parents create drama to cover their own neglect," Frank said loudly, his eyes sliding toward me. "Projection, they call it." "Sad, really." I forced myself forward, past his bulk, heart hammering. "Matthew. Time to go." He bolted down the stairs and into my arms. His whole body trembled. As we turned toward the door, he whispered in my ear. He was in the bathroom with me again. My blood turned to fire. Frank followed us out, already holding up his phone, recording. "Look at her. Dragging that poor boy around in her delusional state. Unstable. Dangerous. I'm calling CPS right now." Neighbors stepped out onto porches. Phones came up. Watching. Recording. Believing him. I buckled Matthew into the car as quickly as I could, every eye burning into me. We sped away with no destination in mind, just trying to get far enough to breathe. I ended up at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. In a booth in the back, Matthew sipped chocolate milk, his small hands shaking. I plugged the flash drive Mr. Larson had given me into my laptop, praying there was something on it I could use. There was. Audio recordings. Dozens of them. Conversations between Frank and Principal Green. One made my hands go numb. Green's voice, calm and icy. "We handled the Martinez family the same way. They won't be talking to anyone." Another file, dated last year. "The Larson situation is contained. Parents believe what we tell them to believe." I covered my mouth. This wasn't just me. This was systematic. But before I could process it, blue and red lights flashed through the diner windows. 2 police cruisers pulled in. Across the street, Frank's van idled in the shadows. The officers approached with neutral expressions, but I could see it in their eyes, they'd already been told who I was. One said, "We've received multiple calls about your welfare and your sons. We'd like you to come with us voluntarily, or we'll have to involve Child Protective Services." The trap was perfect. If I agreed, I looked guilty but cooperative. If I resisted, I proved them right, that I was unstable, dangerous. I reached for Matthew's hand under the table. His small fingers squeezed mine, trembling. I didn't know how much more we could take. At the police station, everything blurred into fluorescent lights and paperwork. They sat me in a small room with Matthew beside me, his little legs swinging nervously off the chair. The CPS worker who entered introduced herself with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. On her badge, I saw the emblem, Graduate of Principal Green's Leadership Program. My stomach plummeted. Moments later, David walked in, and right behind him, Green herself. It was like a performance. Green placed a hand on his shoulder, playing the concerned ally. "We just want what's best for Matthew," she said. David nodded solemnly. "Anna's been spiraling. Dragging him around town. Accusing people without proof." His voice cracked in rehearsed sadness. "She's scaring him." I wanted to scream. Instead, I whispered, "I have evidence." But when I opened my phone, the files from the flash drive, the recordings that had felt like my lifeline, were gone. Corrupted. 0 bytes. Green's smile flickered. "Evidence," she repeated softly, as though she pitied me. The CPS worker leaned forward. "Mrs. Thompson, the courts take delusions very seriously. You need help." They granted David emergency custody within hours. My visitation rights suspended until I underwent a full psychological evaluation. I watched from behind the glass as Matthew was handed to his father. Frank hovered in the corner of the visitation room, supporting the school as a representative. Matthew froze when he saw him, his little body rigid with terror. But no one else noticed. As David walked him out, Matthew glanced back, eyes wide with desperation. His hand twitched, like he was reaching for me, and then he was gone. I collapsed into the plastic chair, shaking so badly I thought I'd break. That night, in the cheap motel where I hid from the whispers, I emptied my purse onto the bed. My phone was useless. My lawyer had abandoned me. My ex had betrayed me. But then my hand brushed against something small and sharp. A key. Matthew had slipped it into my palm in the visitation room. On it, a number, 237. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I drove to the crumbling roadside motel 2 blocks from the school, the kind that still used metal keys instead of cards. Room 237 opened with a click. Inside were boxes stacked high. Folders. Photos. Evidence. And on top of it all, a handwritten note in Mr. Larson's shaky script. "They've done this before. Don't stop. For Matthew." I sifted through the boxes with trembling hands. Medical reports. Photos of bruises. Statements from other children. One name leapt out at me, Timothy Martinez. His description of what Frank had done to him was almost identical to Matthew's: the bathroom, the locked door, the bruises on his wrists. But Timothy's report included something worse. He'd seen Green there too. The Martinez family had moved away suddenly last year. Now I knew why. By the time I made it back to the courthouse the next morning, word had already begun to spread. Another family had stepped forward. Then another. The walls around Frank and Green weren't impenetrable after all, they were cracking. The moment came when Matthew himself broke down in supervised visitation. His small voice filled the sterile room as he told the CPS worker what Frank had done. Then he pointed to his stuffed bear in David's hands. "There's a camera inside," he whispered. David froze. His face drained as he remembered the nanny cam I'd hidden during our divorce, the one we'd forgotten about. The footage was pulled. It was damning. Time-stamped. Undeniable. For the first time, the police didn't look at me with pity. They looked at Frank. And then they put him in handcuffs. The weeks that followed were a blur. Green was arrested too, her files seized. Families came forward one after another. The quiet shame that had silenced them for years turned into rage. Matthew started therapy. He still woke up screaming some nights, but he was safe. And for the first time, people began to believe me. Even David broke down one afternoon, sobbing in the hospital corridor after seeing the footage. He begged me to forgive him for siding with them. I didn't answer. I just walked past him to hold Matthew's hand. Because forgiveness was something I couldn't give, not yet. Maybe not ever. It's been months now. Our lives aren't normal. They probably never will be. But Matthew is smiling again, bit by bit. And sometimes, when I look at him, I think back to what Mr. Larson whispered that morning in the empty classroom. They've done this before. He was right. But they'd never gone up against a mother with nothing left to lose.